I am holding a standard orange prescription bottle. It weighs less than 2 ounces. The label has my name on it. The dosage instructions are correct. And the child-proof cap clicks just like it should. But if you look closely at the dust at the bottom, or if you were to take just one of the capsules apart, you would realize that this isn't medicine. It's a weapon. It's a silent, slow-acting bullet designed to stop a heart that was already struggling to beat. My sister didn't use a gun or a knife to try and kill me for my estate. She used my own trust and a mortar and pestle. If you want to know how I went from being a paranoid invalid to the woman who watched her own family get escorted out of a memorial lunch in handcuffs, stay with me until the end. My name is Clara. I'm 34, and up until 6 months ago, I was the owner of a successful logistics firm and a sprawling historic estate that had been in my family for 3 generations. I was also, according to my doctors, a ticking time bomb. Let's just say that genetic hypertension isn't something you can negotiate with. It doesn't care how much money you have or how organic your diet is. It just tightens the vice around your chest until you feel like you're breathing through a straw. And honestly, looking back, I think that physical weakness was the only thing my sister Elena and her husband Mark ever really saw when they looked at me. They didn't see a sibling. They saw a dying asset. The end really began on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that feels deceptively perfect. Sunlight was streaming through the French doors, hitting the crystal glasses on the dining table, so creating these little rainbows that danced on the white tablecloth. From the outside, it looked like a tragedy unfolding in real time. The poor, sick sister collapsing at the head of the table, clutching her chest while her loving family screamed for help. But the reality was much colder. I wasn't dying. I was waiting. I was watching Mark check his watch. Not with panic, but with impatience. I was watching Elena's hand hover over her phone, hesitating to dial 911 because they needed just a few more minutes of natural causes to ensure the job was finished. They thought the sirens wailing in the distance were coming to pronounce me dead. They had no idea those lights were coming to burn their entire lives to the ground. You have to understand, though, this didn't start with murder. And it started with help. That's the insidious thing about parasites. They don't break in. They get invited in. 6 months prior, my cardiologist had given me the news that my condition had worsened. I needed calm, I needed monitoring, and I strictly needed to avoid stress. And so, my cousin Sarah, who has always been the family peacekeeper, or as I call her, the path of least resistance, basically staged an intervention. She sat me down, held my hand, and gave me this teary-eyed speech about how I shouldn't be alone in this big house, and how Elena and Mark were struggling in their cramped apartment and would love to come take care of me. I mean, she made it sound like a fairy tale solution. She talked about how Elena used to take care of me when we were kids, how she would braid my hair and make me soup. And for a second, in looking at Sarah's earnest face, I let myself remember that version of Elena. The ghost memory hit me hard. I remembered being 7 years old, scraping my knee on the pavement, and Elena carrying me all the way home on her back, telling me I was a soldier. I miss that sister. I miss the feeling of safety she used to carry with her like a perfume. But the Elena who moved into my guest wing wasn't that girl anymore. That girl had been replaced by a woman who looked at my furniture like she was appraising it for an auction. Basically, within a week, the atmosphere in my sanctuary shifted. You know that feeling when the air pressure drops right before a storm? That's what my house felt like. Mark was the primary problem, though he tried to hide it behind this veneer of aggressive helpfulness. He was a consultant, which, as far as I could tell, meant he spent all day on his phone in my garden, smoking cigarettes that he swore he wasn't smoking, and losing money on sports apps. He had this way of looking at me that made my skin crawl, a clinical observation, like a farmer checking livestock for signs of rot. He would ask about my tremors with a tone that sounded concerned to an outsider, but to me, it sounded hopeful. Have you ever realized that the person supposed to protect you is actually the one holding the door open for the wolf? The care was suffocating. Elena took over the kitchen, claiming my diet needed to be stricter. She took over the cleaning, claiming the dust was bad for my lungs. And most critically, she took over the pharmacy runs. She insisted that I shouldn't be driving, that the stress of traffic was bad for my numbers. "Let me handle the burden, Clara," she would say, with this tight, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. And honestly, I was so tired, so physically drained from the medication adjustments, that I let her. I handed over the keys to my health because I wanted to believe that family is inherently good. But the symptoms didn't get better. They got worse. Much worse. I would take my morning beta blocker, the one designed to slow my heart rate and widen my blood vessels, and within 20 minutes, I would feel like I had chugged 5 espressos. My hands would start shaking so violently I couldn't hold a pen. My chest would hammer a rhythm that felt jagged, irregular, like a bird trapped in a ribcage. I remember lying on the bathroom floor one Tuesday, the cold tile against my cheek being the only thing grounding me, while the room spun in nauseating circles. I called out for Elena. She didn't run to me. She walked. She strolled into the bathroom, looked down at me with this vague expression of annoyance masked as pity, and told me I was having a panic attack. She didn't check my pulse. She didn't offer to call the doctor. She just stood there, towering over me, and lectured me about emotional regulation. She claimed that I was working myself up, that my paranoia was spiking my pressure, and that if I just relaxed and let them handle the finances and the estate management, my heart would settle down. And here's the thing. Gaslighting works best when you are biologically vulnerable. When your brain is foggy from illness, you start to doubt your own reality. I started to wonder if she was right. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe I was ungrateful. Here they were, living in my house, cooking my meals, handling my pills, and I was accusing them of… what? Malice? It felt impossible. But then, there was the noise. Mark. He wasn't subtle when he thought I was asleep. My bedroom is on the 2nd floor, right above the library where he liked to take his late-night calls. The old vents in this house carry sound like a telephone wire. I would be lying there, staring at the ceiling, my heart doing gymnastics in my chest, and I would hear him. He wasn't whispering sweet nothings to my sister. He was arguing. I heard words like leverage, deadline, and liquidation. I heard the distinct sharp snap of a lighter, followed by the low murmur of him assuring someone that it wouldn't be much longer. I tried to tell Sarah. I really did. I invited her over for tea. And I tried to explain that something felt wrong, that the pills didn't feel like medicine anymore. And Sarah just sighed. She looked at me with this exhausting compassion and told me that I was projecting. She said that Mark was just stressed because he was trying to launch a business, and that Elena was exhausted from caring for me. She actually used the phrase, "You need to stop looking for enemies where there are only allies, Clara." She made me feel small. She made me feel like a burden who was biting the hand that fed her. But the body doesn't lie. That's the one thing they forgot. You can lie to my face. You can forge a smile, but you cannot talk my physiology out of a reaction. I knew the difference between calm and chaos. And every time Elena handed me that little paper cup with my 2 white pills and 1 blue capsule, I wasn't swallowing calm. I was swallowing chaos. It wasn't until the incident in the kitchen that the fog finally lifted. I had come down early, around 5 a.m., unable to sleep because of the palpitations. The house was dark, silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I saw Elena's purse sitting open on the kitchen island. It was careless. Mark was usually so careful about their privacy, but they had gotten comfortable. They had gotten arrogant. Beside the purse was a receipt that had fallen out. I picked it up. It wasn't for groceries. It wasn't for gas. It was a receipt from a supplement store 3 towns over, a bulk purchase. Anhydrous caffeine powder, 1 kilogram. I stared at that piece of paper. My brain tried to do the math. Mark drank coffee, sure, but a kilo of pure powder? That's enough to kill a horse if you use it wrong. And then I looked at the date. It was purchased yesterday. The same day Elena had picked up my refill from the pharmacy. My hands went cold. Not the sick cold I was used to, but a new kind of cold. The cold of absolute, terrifying clarity. The ringing in my ears stopped, replaced by the thudding realization that the people sleeping down the hall weren't just bad roommates. They were executioners. And I was financing my own assassination. I sat there in the kitchen, staring at that receipt for the kilogram of caffeine powder, and for a moment, I tried to rationalize it. You have to understand, the human brain is wired to protect you from truths that are too painful to bear. And I told myself maybe Mark was trying to make his own energy drinks. Maybe it was for a gym supplement. I mean, people buy weird things online all the time, right? But deep down, in the pit of my stomach where the fear lives, I knew. The puzzle pieces of my worsening condition were slamming together with a violence that made me nauseous. That night, the experiment began. I didn't say anything about the receipt. I put it back exactly where I found it, slipped upstairs, and waited. I needed to see if they would do it again. I needed to know if the enemy was truly inside the gates. Dinner was a pasta dish, heavy on the garlic, perfect for masking tastes. Elena was unusually attentive. She poured my water. She fluffed the pillows on the dining chair, and she kept asking how my stress levels were. It was a performance. I could see the tightness in her jaw, the way her eyes darted to Mark every time I took a bite. Mark, on the other hand, was cool as a cucumber. He was scrolling through his phone, making small talk about the weather, but his foot was tapping this rapid, nervous rhythm under the table, tap, 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 like a countdown. Then came the ritual. "Time for your meds, Clara," Elena said. She didn't look at me when she said it. She walked to the sideboard, rattled the orange bottle, and brought over the little paper cup. 2 white pills, 1 blue capsule. The blue one was supposed to be the beta blocker, the lifesaver. I took the cup. My hand was trembling, and for the first time it wasn't from the illness. It was from the adrenaline of holding a loaded gun to my own head. I looked at Mark. He stopped scrolling. He watched me. He didn't blink. And there was this hungry, predatory stillness in him that terrified me more than any shout ever could. I put the pills in my mouth, took a sip of water, and swallowed. I know. You're thinking, why did you take it if you knew? Because I needed to be sure. And honestly, part of me still hoped nothing would happen. Part of me prayed that in 20 minutes, I would just feel sleepy and calm, and I would have to apologize for being a paranoid wreck. But 20 minutes later, the fire started. It began in my chest, a flutter that turned into a gallop. Then the heat hit the back of my neck. My vision started to tunnel, the edges of the room turning gray and staticky. It wasn't the slow, creeping anxiety of a panic attack. This was chemical. It was violent. It felt like someone had injected rocket fuel directly into my aorta. My heart rate monitor, which I wear on my wrist, started beeping. 110, 120, 145. I don't feel well, I managed to choke out. My voice sounded underwater. Elena looked up from her magazine. She didn't jump up. She didn't rush to me. She just sighed, this heavy, theatrical exhale, and said, "Clara, please. You're working yourself up again. Just breathe." "No," I gasped, clutching the table. The room was spinning now. 160 BPM. My chest, It hurts. And here is where the puppet master dynamic became undeniable. Mark didn't even look up. He just said, in this bored, monotone voice, "She's fine, Elle. Don't coddle her. It's just attention-seeking." I tried to stand up, but my legs were jelly. I collapsed onto the rug. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I was gasping for air, clutching at my throat. My heart hammering so hard I thought my ribs would crack. 180 beats per minute. The alarm on my watch was screaming now, a high-pitched digital shriek that filled the room. "Call 911, I wheezed. I looked at Elena. "Please." She stood up then, hesitating. She looked at me, lying on the floor, and for a split second I saw panic in her eyes. I saw the sister who used to carry me. But then she looked at Mark. Mark slowly set his phone down. He stood up, walked over to me, and looked down. He didn't check my pulse. He just stared. And then he looked at Elena and gave the slightest shake of his head. A silent order. "Wait. I can't find my phone," Elena stammered, her voice pitching up. She started patting her pockets, acting out this frantic search that was so obviously fake, it made me want to scream. "Mark, where's my phone?" "I can't find it." "Check the kitchen," Mark said calmly. "Or maybe the car. Take your time, honey. We don't want to call the ambulance for a panic attack again. The bill is expensive." They were stalling. They were literally watching me stroke out on the Persian rug and discussing the cost of the ambulance as an excuse to let me die. I realized then that I was on my own. If I wanted to live, I had to save myself. I dragged myself across the floor. I literally clawed my way toward the landline on the side table. My vision was almost gone, just blur and light. But I knew where the cord was. Mark watched me do it. He didn't stop me physically. That would be assault. He just watched, betting on my heart giving out before I reached the receiver. I pulled the phone down. I dialed 3 numbers with fingers that felt like numb sausages. 911. When the operator answered, I screamed my address. I didn't wait for questions. I just screamed the address in heart attack. Only then did the performance change. As soon as Mark heard the operator's voice, he sprang into action. He was suddenly the concerned brother-in-law, kneeling beside me, grabbing my hand, shouting, "Hang in there, Clara! Help is coming! Oh God, Elena, she's fading!" The audacity was breathtaking. The ambulance ride was a blur of lights and needles. But the hospital, that was where the second layer of the trap revealed itself. The gaslighting. I was in the ER, hooked up to monitors, stabilized but exhausted. The attending physician, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Evans, came in with a clipboard. She looked confused. "Ms. Vance," she said, looking at my chart, "we stabilized your rhythm, but your blood work is unusual. Your caffeine levels are off the charts. It looks like acute toxicity. Have you been taking supplements? Or drinking a lot of energy drinks?" Before I could speak, before I could even wet my dry lips, Mark and Elena were there. They had followed the ambulance. "Oh, doctor," Mark said, stepping forward with this charming, apologetic smile. "That's probably my fault. I made a pot of that super strong Cuban coffee this afternoon, and Clara insisted on having a huge mug. We told her it was too strong, but she can be very stubborn. And she's been taking these diet pills," Elena added quickly, her voice trembling with fake concern. "I told her they were dangerous with her heart condition, but she's so self-conscious about her weight lately, she hides them in her room." I stared at them. I was too weak to shout. I too drugged to argue. I just lay there, blinking. Dr. Evans looked from them to me. "Is that true, Clara? Diet pills and espresso?" "No," I whispered. "They gave me my meds." "She's confused," Mark said softly, patting my shoulder. "The lack of oxygen, you know? She gets like this, very paranoid. Last week she thought the mailman was spying on her." The doctor hesitated. She looked at the loving family, the concerned sister holding my hand, the brother-in-law asking intelligent questions about my prognosis. And then she looked at the confused patient. She sighed and wrote something on the chart. "Okay," she said. "We'll monitor her overnight. But no more caffeine, Clara. You're lucky your heart didn't stop completely." They had won the round, and they had turned my attempted murder into a stubborn patient's mistake. But the war wasn't over. They took me home 2 days later. And this is when the shift happened. The moment the victim died and the hunter was born. I was lying in my bed, pretending to be asleep. The house was quiet, but my hearing was sharpened by fear. I had left my bedroom door cracked open just an inch. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Then the hushed, angry whispers. "It didn't work, Mark," Elena hissed. "She's still here, and the doctor was asking questions." "The doctor is an idiot," Mark snapped. His voice was cold, devoid of the charm he used in public. "She bought the coffee story. We're fine." "We're not fine." Elena's voice cracked. "You said it would look natural. You said one big dose and her heart would just pop. Now she's going to be watching us." "She's a vegetable, Elle. She's too drugged up to watch anything." Mark paused, and I heard the flick of a lighter. "Besides, we don't have a choice. I got a text from Vinny today." "Vinny?" Elena sounded horrified. "I thought you paid him off with the jewelry money." "The interest compounded," Mark said, his voice dropping to a growl. "We owe 150 grand by the end of the month. If we don't get that inheritance, they're not going to break my legs, Elle. They're going to come for us. Both of us." There it was. The motive. $150,000 in gambling debt. My life was worth exactly that much to them. "So what do we do?" Elena whispered. "We can't overdose her again. It's too suspicious." "No," Mark said. "We don't overdose her all at once. We drip feed it. Keep her heart rate up constantly. It'd wear it down, induce a stroke. If she strokes out, she can't talk, can't change the will, and eventually, nature takes its course. We just need to up the daily dosage, grind it finer so she doesn't taste the bitterness." "Okay," Elena said. "Okay. Monday. We start Monday." I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My heart wasn't racing. For the first time in months, I felt completely, terrifically calm. I realized then that crying was useless. Begging was useless. They weren't family. They were a virus. And you don't negotiate with a virus. You eradicate it. They wanted a stroke? They wanted a vegetable? Fine. I would give them a performance that would win an Oscar. I would play the part of the dying, confused invalid perfectly. I would let them think they were winning every single day. And, while they were busy counting their imaginary inheritance, I was going to be busy digging their graves. I didn't sleep that night. I planned. The next morning, the house was quiet, but the air felt different. It wasn't the heavy silence of dread anymore. It was the sharp, electric silence of a hunt. I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years, probably because for the first time in months, my bloodstream wasn't flooded with stimulants. You see, the night before, when Elena handed me my evening dose, I didn't swallow it. I did what every rebellious teenager in a psych ward learns to do. I cheeked it. I hid the capsule between my gum and my cheek, took a big gulp of water to show my throat moving, and gave her a weak, grateful smile. As soon as she turned off the light, I spit that little blue capsule into a tissue and hid it inside my hollow curtain rod. Basically, I had to become an actor in my own life. I had to look like I was deteriorating while I was actually getting stronger. I spent the morning shuffling around in my bathrobe, holding on to furniture for balance, and complaining about a buzzing in my head. Mark watched me from the sofa with this satisfied smirk, like a director watching a scene go exactly as planned. He even offered to make me tea, which I accepted and then poured into the potted fern the second he looked away. But acting wasn't enough. I needed proof. I needed something that would stand up in a courtroom, something that would cut through their "she's paranoid and confused" defense like a hot knife through butter. I needed the receipts. The first step was the eyes. I couldn't be everywhere at once, especially not when I was supposed to be bedridden. So, I used my phone, the one they thought I was too befuddled to use properly, and ordered 3 motion-activated nanny cams disguised as USB wall chargers. Thank God for same-day delivery. When the package arrived, I told Elena it was just new chargers because I kept losing mine. She didn't even check the box. She just rolled her eyes at my clumsiness and tossed it on the counter. That night, while they were watching TV, I plugged one into the kitchen outlet facing the island where they prepared my meds. I plugged another in the hallway outside my door to catch their conversations. And then, I waited. The next part was trickier. The chemical proof. I needed to know exactly what was in those blue capsules. I knew it was caffeine. But I think it's caffeine doesn't get you an attempted murder conviction. Lab-confirmed lethal dosage does. I called Mr. Henderson. He was my operations manager at the logistics firm for 20 years, a man who had seen me build the company from a garage to a warehouse. I texted him on an encrypted app. Urgent, personal. Come to the back garden gate at 2 a.m. Do not ring the bell. At 2 a.m., I crept downstairs. The house groaned with every step, and my heart was hammering. Not from drugs this time, but from the sheer terror of being caught. If Mark woke up and found me sneaking out, the game was over. He would know I was lucid. He would know I was plotting. I met Henderson by the ivy-covered gate. He looked terrified seeing me so thin, so pale. I handed him a small Ziploc bag containing 3 of the cheeked blue capsules. Take these to the independent toxicology lab in the city, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the wind. Pay cash. Rush order. I need a full breakdown of the contents. And Henderson? If anything happens to me, take this to the police. He nodded, his eyes wide, and slipped into the darkness. The next 48 hours were an eternity. I had to keep up the charade. I had to let Elena help me to the bathroom. I had to listen to Mark talk about how maybe it's time to look at assisted living facilities, because I was becoming too much to handle. I had to bite my tongue until it bled to keep from screaming at them. I mean, the audacity was physical. It felt like a slap in the face every time they feigned concern. And then the email came. I was in bed, pretending to nap, with my phone hidden under the duvet. In the subject line was innocuous. Logistics report, batch 404. Henderson knew the code. I opened the attachment. It was a PDF from the lab. I zoomed in, my breath catching in my throat. The document was cold, clinical, and absolutely damning. It read, Certificate of Analysis. Sample ID, blue gelatin capsule, 3 count. Visual inspection, tampering evident on capsule seal. Active ingredient, found, 1,3,7-trimethylxanthine, anhydrous caffeine. Dosage per unit, 450 milligrams plus or minus 5 milligrams. Notes. Contents are 99.8% pure industrial-grade caffeine powder. No pharmaceutical fillers detected. Lethal toxicity risk. High. Dosage equivalent to approximately 5 cups of strong coffee per capsule. Combined with prescription beta blockers, this compound creates a high risk of cardiac arrhythmia and stroke. 450 milligrams per pill. And they were giving me 3 a day. They weren't just poisoning me. They were redlining my engine until it exploded. I stared at the screen, and for a second I couldn't breathe. My hands went cold, ice cold. The ringing in my ears was deafening. It wasn't sadness. I didn't cry. I think I was past crying. It was this hollow, vibrating shock. You read about evil in books, you see it in movies, but seeing it on a piece of letterhead with a lab stamp, it makes it real in a way that your brain can't reject. My sister wasn't misguided. She wasn't desperate. She was calculating the exact milligram required to kill me, but the lab report was just the bullet. I needed the gun. I waited until they left for their gym session, which I knew was actually a meeting with their loan shark, and I retrieved the memory card from the kitchen camera. And I plugged it into my laptop, my fingers trembling so hard I could barely hit the keys. I scrubbed through hours of footage. Boring footage of them making coffee, eating toast, arguing about money, and then, jackpot. Tuesday, 7:45 p.m. The video showed Mark standing at the kitchen island. He had a bag of white powder, the same bag from the receipt, and a small digital scale. Elena was standing next to him, holding my prescription bottle. I watched, mesmerized by the horror of it. Mark carefully opened the blue capsules, dumping the real medicine into the sink and washing it down. Then he used a tiny funnel to pour the white powder into the empty shells. And here's the thing that broke me. Here's the detail that killed the last shred of love I had for my sister. Elena wasn't crying. She wasn't looking away in shame. She was annoyed. On the video, she leaned over the counter and said something. I turned the volume up to max. "Be careful, you're spilling it," she said, her voice tinny through the laptop speakers. "That stuff is expensive, and make sure you wipe the counter. If she finds white dust, she'll think we're doing coke or something." Mark chuckled, actually chuckled, and said, "Don't worry. She won't be finding anything soon. How much longer did the doctor say? If she keeps taking these, her valves should give out by the weekend." "Hopefully before Sunday," Elena replied, snapping the cap back onto the bottle. "I don't want to drag this out. I want to book that trip to Bali." I paused the video. I looked at Elena's face frozen on the screen. She looked so normal. She was wearing the sweater I bought her for Christmas. When she was talking about killing me so she could go on vacation. I closed the laptop. The room was silent, but inside my head it was screaming. The fear was gone. The shock was gone. In their place was something cold, hard, and incredibly sharp. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And I had the receipts. Honestly, the hardest part wasn't finding the poison. It wasn't even watching the video of my sister casually discussing my death like she was planning a grocery run. The hardest part was the smiling. You have to understand, once you know someone is trying to kill you, every instinct in your body screams at you to run, to fight, to vomit. But I couldn't do any of that. If I ran, they would spin the narrative that I was having a psychotic break and needed to be institutionalized. If I fought, they might panic and finish the job with a pillow over my face. So, I had to put on a mask. I had to look at the woman who swapped my heart medication for lethal stimulants and say, "Thank you for taking such good care of me, Elena." Basically, I had to become the very thing they thought I was, a helpless, grateful victim. The first step was neutralizing their timeline. I knew from the video that they were desperate for cash by the end of the month. I needed to buy myself 3 days until the Sunday family lunch. So the next morning, I shuffled into the kitchen, leaning heavily on my cane, a prop I didn't actually need anymore since my heart rate had stabilized, and dropped the bait. "I've been thinking," I said, my voice trembling just enough to sell it. "I don't want to be a burden anymore. I called my lawyer. I'm updating the estate plan. I want to sign over power of attorney to you and Mark this Sunday. We can make it official at lunch." You should have seen the look they exchanged. It was this electric jolt of greed. Mark actually stopped chewing his toast. The tension in his shoulders, the tension of a man who owes $150,000 to violent people, instantly evaporated. That's a big decision, Clara," Mark said, trying to sound solemn while his eyes practically lit up with dollar signs. "Are you sure?" I'm sure, I whispered, clutching my chest for effect. I just want you both to be safe. I want the house to be yours. We can celebrate on Sunday. Just keep me going until then, okay? And just like that, I was safe. I had given them a financial incentive to keep me alive for 72 more hours. The drip feed of poison would slow down because they needed me lucid enough to sign papers in front of witnesses. But I wasn't just stalling. I was tightening the noose around the puppet master's neck. See, I knew Elena was the hand that poured the powder, but Mark was the brain that bought it. I needed to make sure he couldn't play the ignorant husband card when the police arrived. I needed to tie him to the crime so tightly that even a hacksaw couldn't cut him loose. I waited until Mark went for his jog, another meeting with the loan shark, I assumed, and slipped into the library. He was usually careful with his phone, but he was arrogant with his iPad. He left it on the charger, assuming I was too brain-fogged to guess the passcode. I mean, honestly, 1, 2, 3, 4? It was almost insulting. I opened his messages, and there it was. The smoking gun for the motive, a thread with a contact named V-Man. "TikTok, Mark. Tuesday is the deadline. If you don't have the 150,000, we're taking it out of your kneecaps." And Mark's reply, sent 2 hours ago. "Relax. The cow is almost milked. She's signing everything over on Sunday. You'll have your cash by Monday morning." The cow. I felt a cold flash of rage that almost made me drop the tablet. He didn't just want me dead, he dehumanized me to make it easier. I took photos of every single text with my burner phone, the threats, the promises, the timeline. I now had proof of premeditation, conspiracy, and financial motive. This wasn't manslaughter. This was first-degree attempted murder. The final piece of the puzzle was the logistics. I couldn't just call 911 during lunch. It's too chaotic. I needed a surgical strike. I contacted Detective Vance, no relation to me, just a grim irony, through Henderson. I sent him a secure Dropbox link containing everything: the lab report from the pills, the video of the tampering, the screenshots of the gambling debt, and my own video testimony explaining the timeline. Henderson texted me back 2 hours later. He's seen it. He wanted to come arrest them now. I told him the plan. He agrees that catching them in the act of administering the poison at the lunch makes the case airtight. He'll have a unit down the street at 1 p.m. Just give the signal. The signal. We decided on a simple one. I would text Henderson a single word: dessert. The night before the lunch, the house felt different. It was the calm before the execution. I lay in bed, listening to Elena humming in her room down the hall. She was probably packing for Bali in her head. She sounded happy. And here's the thing. For a second, I felt sick. Not physically, but morally. I was about to destroy my sister. I was about to send her to prison for the rest of her life. I remembered the nights we spent whispering under blanket forts, the way she used to defend me from bullies on the playground. I wish there was another way. I really did. I lay there in the dark, waiting for her to come in and confess. I waited for her to say, "Clara, run. Mark is making me do this." If she had come in right then, if she had shown even 1 ounce of hesitation, I might have called it off. I might have just kicked them out and let them run from the loan sharks on their own. But she didn't come. The only time she entered my room was to place a glass of water on my nightstand. "Drink up, Clara," she said softly. "You need your strength for tomorrow." I looked at the water. I could see the faint, cloudy residue of the powder settling at the bottom. She wasn't defending me from bullies anymore. She was the bully, and she wasn't stopping. "Thanks, Elle," I said, turning away so she wouldn't see the cold, hard resolve in my eyes. "I'll drink it in a minute." As soon as she left, I poured the water into the potted plant. "Goodbye, Elena," I whispered to the empty room. The trap was set. The players were in position. Tomorrow we would have a family lunch. And only one of us was walking away from the table. Sunday arrived with a sky so blue it felt like a mockery. The air was crisp. The birds were singing. And my house smelled like roasting lamb and rosemary. To an outsider, it was the picture of domestic bliss, a wealthy family gathering for a leisurely lunch in a sun-drenched dining room. But to me, the air was thick enough to choke on. Every clatter of silverware sounded like a gunshot. Every laugh felt sharp and jagged like broken glass. I spent the morning in my room, resting, while Elena and Mark bustled around downstairs. I could hear them, the clinking of wine glasses, the confident, heavy footsteps of people who believe they have already won. They were celebrating early. They were popping the champagne on the deck of the Titanic, completely unaware of the iceberg waiting beneath the surface. At 12:30 p.m., I made my entrance. I wore a soft gray cardigan, something that made me look frail and harmless, and leaned heavily on my cane. I didn't wear makeup. I wanted the contrast to be brutal. I wanted them to see a dying woman, a ghost in her own home. When I walked into the dining room, the conversation stopped. Elena was wearing a bright yellow sundress, looking vibrant and alive, the perfect picture of the devoted sister. Mark was in a crisp polo shirt, already swirling a glass of my best Cabernet, and there was Cousin Sarah sitting between them, beaming with that naive, peacekeeping smile that had enabled this entire nightmare. "Oh, Clara," Sarah chirped, standing up to help me. "You look rested." "Doesn't she look rested, Elena?" "Much better." Elena lied smoothly, pulling out my chair. Her hand brushed my shoulder and I had to physically restrain myself from flinching. Her touch felt like a brand. "We made your favorite, lamb with mint jelly, and plenty of vegetables for your heart." "Thank you," I whispered, sinking into the chair. "You're too good to me." Mark raised his glass. "To family," he said, his voice booming with false conviviality, "and to new beginnings." He winked at Elena. New beginnings, a code for post-Clara life. The lunch was an exercise in torture. I picked at my food, watching them eat with gusto. Mark was practically vibrating with excitement. He kept checking his watch, then glancing at the sideboard where a stack of legal documents sat waiting. The power of attorney papers I had promised to sign. He thought those papers were his golden ticket. He didn't know they were just a decoy to keep him at the table. But the worst part wasn't the greed. It was the audacity. Halfway through the meal, Mark started talking about the future. "You know, Clara," he said, leaning back in his chair and gesturing with his fork. "Once we get this paperwork sorted out, Elena and I were thinking of making some changes around here. This place is a lot for one person. We were thinking of maybe selling off the back acreage, liquidating some assets so you don't have to worry about maintenance costs." "Liquidating," I repeated softly, "to help me." "Exactly." Elena chimed in, reaching for the wine bottle. "We just want you to be comfortable. You've worked so hard your whole life. It's time for you to relax and let us handle the stress." "Honestly, Clara, you should be thanking Mark. He's been up all night researching the market for you." I looked at Mark. He was preening. He actually believed his own lie. He looked at me with this condescending pity, like I was a child who didn't understand how the world worked. "It's the least I can do," Mark said, taking a sip of wine. "Family takes care of family. I mean, look at you. You can barely lift a fork. Imagine trying to manage a property portfolio in this state. It's just irresponsible." Irresponsible. The word hung in the air. My blood ran cold. This man, who had gambled away $150,000 and was currently poisoning my morning coffee, was lecturing me on responsibility. "And," Elena added, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "we were thinking maybe we could use some of the proceeds to take a little trip. Just a weekend getaway. You know, To recharge so we can take better care of you. We were thinking Bali. Bali. The trip from the video. The trip they were going to pay for with my life insurance. I gripped the edge of the table. My knuckles turned white. The anger that had been simmering in my gut for days suddenly boiled over, hot and fierce. They were planning their vacation over my corpse, while I was sitting right there. Bali sounds nice, I managed to say. Very peaceful? It is, Mark said, grinning. Very peaceful. You'd love the photos. I looked around the table. Sarah was nodding along, completely oblivious. Elena was smiling at her reflection in the spoon. Mark was already spending the money in his head. The silence in the room wasn't peaceful. It was predatory. The only sound was the clinking of silverware and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Counting down the seconds of their freedom. I checked my own watch. 1:15 p.m. The police unit was parked 2 streets over. Henderson was waiting by the phone. It was time. Actually, I said, my voice suddenly stronger, clearer. I sat up straighter in my chair, dropping the frail invalid act for just a second. I think I'm ready for dessert now. Elena, would you get my special medicine? I'm feeling a bit fluttery. Elena's eyes lit up. This was it. The final dose. The one that would push my fluttery heart over the edge right before I signed the papers. Of course, sweetie, she said, standing up too quickly. I'll get it right now. Don't strain yourself. She walked to the kitchen. I watched her go. I watched Mark lean forward, his eyes locked on me, waiting for the show to begin. I reached into my pocket and touched the phone. I typed one word to Henderson. Dessert. Then I put the phone on the table, screen down, and waited for my sister to bring me the poison one last time. Elena walked back into the dining room, holding the paper cup like it was a chalice. She had that same tight, practiced smile plastered on her face, the one that didn't quite reach her eyes. The pills rattled softly against the paper. Shh, shh, shh. A sound that used to make my stomach turn, but now just sounded like the tumblers of a lock clicking into place. She set the cup down in front of me. 2 white pills, 1 blue capsule, the death cocktail. Here you go, Clara, she said, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet nurse affectation. Take these, and then we can sign the papers. Then you can rest. Mark stopped chewing. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, his eyes fixed on my hand. He was vibrating with anticipation. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the finish line. He was probably already mentally transferring the funds to his bookie. Cousin Sarah was smiling encouragingly, nodding at me to take my medicine like a good little invalid. The room went silent. The only sound was the grandfather clock in the hall. Tick, tock. I reached for the cup. I lifted it. I saw Mark's shoulders relax just an inch. He thought he had won. And then I set the cup back down. Hard. The sound was like a gavel striking a block. Actually, I said, my voice dropping the tremble, dropping the weakness, becoming the voice of the woman who ran a logistics empire. I don't think I need these today. My heart feels surprisingly strong. Mark's smile faltered. It didn't disappear, but it froze. He looked confused, like a predator whose prey had just stood up on its hind legs. Clara? Elena asked, her voice wavering. What do you mean? You have to take them. Dr. Evans said to avoid stress. I interrupted, standing up. I didn't use the cane. I pushed the chair back and stood at the head of the table, towering over them. And honestly, the only thing stressing my heart right now is the lie. I picked up the remote control for the 65-inch smart TV mounted on the wall behind Mark. I have a little presentation for you. Consider it a toast to new beginnings. I pressed play. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a slideshow of family memories. It was the grainy, high-definition footage from the hidden kitchen camera. Tuesday night, 7:45 p.m. The audio filled the dining room, loud and distorted but unmistakably clear. "Don't worry, she won't be finding anything soon. How much longer did the doctor say? If she keeps taking these, her valves should give out by the weekend." Mark's voice, booming through the speakers. On the screen, and the digital Mark was pouring white powder into the blue capsules. The real Mark went pale. I mean, the blood didn't just drain from his face, it vanished. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. Then came Elena's voice from the speakers. "Hopefully before Sunday. I don't want to drag this out. I want to book that trip to Bali." The reaction in the room was a slow-motion car crash. Cousin Sarah gasped. It was a wet, choking sound. She looked from the TV to Elena, her eyes wide with a horror that shattered her entire worldview. She stood up, knocking her chair over, and backed away from the table as if Elena was radioactive. Elena didn't move. She was staring at the TV, watching herself commit a felony. She looked small. She looked like a child who had broken a vase, terrified of the punishment. But this wasn't a broken vase. It was attempted murder. "What is this?" Mark whispered. His voice was a rasp. He looked at me, his eyes wild, darting around the room like a trapped rat. "Clara, what is this? This is fake. Deep fake. AI, you made this." "It's not AI, Mark," I said, my voice ice cold. "It's evidence. And so is this." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the Ziploc bag containing the 3 capsules I had saved. I held them up. "Lab tested," I said. 450 milligrams of caffeine per pill. Lethal dosage, intent to kill. Mark stood up. The chair screeched against the hardwood floor. For a second I saw it in his eyes. The violence. The realization that the game was rigged, and his only way out was through me. He took a step toward me, his hands curling into fists. "You bitch!" he snarled, the charm completely gone, replaced by the ugly, desperate anger of a loser. "You set us up." "Sit down, Mark." The shout didn't come from me. The front door exploded open. Not opened, exploded. The heavy oak frame splintered as the battering ram hit it. "Police, get down, now." The room was instantly flooded with uniformed officers and tactical gear. The chaotic noise was deafening. Boots on hardwood, commands being shouted, the sound of weapons being unholstered. Mark froze. He looked at the door, then back at me, then at the window. He was calculating the jump. But he was too slow. 2 officers were on him before he could twitch. They slammed him face first onto the dining table, right into the roast lamb. The wine bottle tipped over, spilling red Cabernet across the white tablecloth like a bloodstain spreading in fast motion. "Get off me!" Mark screamed, thrashing against the handcuffs. "I didn't do it. It was her. She mixed them. Check the video. She's the one who gave them to her." And there it was. The puppet master's final act. Betrayal. I looked at Elena. She was being handcuffed by a female officer. Her face was pressed against the wall. She heard Mark scream. She heard him throw her to the wolves to save his own skin. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She just looked at Mark with this expression of absolute crushing heartbreak. The realization that she had tried to kill her own sister for a man who would sell her out in a heartbeat. She slumped, her legs giving out, and the officer had to hold her up. Detective Vance walked in through the shattered door. He was a calm island in the sea of chaos. He walked right up to the table, looked at the spilled wine, looked at Mark squashed into the gravy, and then looked at me. He held up an evidence bag. "We got the powder in the car, Ms. Vance," he said. "Found it under the spare tire, exactly where you said it might be." Mark stopped thrashing. He went limp. The fight was gone. He knew it was over. The officers hauled them up. Mark was red-faced, sputtering about his rights, about entrapment, about anything that would stick. Elena was sobbing now, these deep, heaving wails that sounded like an animal in a trap. She looked at me as they dragged her past. "Clara," she choked out. "Clara, please. I'm sorry. He said we had no choice." I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I watched them the way you watch a storm pass. Destructive, loud, but ultimately temporary. Cousin Sarah was in the corner, weeping into her hands, muttering apologies that I couldn't hear and didn't care about. The room began to clear. The shouting faded as they were dragged out to the cruisers waiting on the lawn. The neighbors were all outside, phones out, filming the downfall of the perfect couple. I stood alone in the dining room. The air smelled of cooling meat and spilled wine. My heart was beating steadily, strong, rhythmically. Thump, 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 thump. The detective paused at the door. "We'll need a statement later, ma'am, but for now. Are you okay?" I looked at the empty chairs. I looked at the TV screen, now paused on my sister's face. I looked at the bottle of pills sitting on the table, the weapon that was supposed to end me. I picked up the bottle, weighed it in my hand, and looked the detective dead in the eye. "Be careful with your blood pressure, detective. Stress is a killer." The aftermath wasn't loud. It was surprisingly, beautifully bureaucratic. You expect the end of a nightmare to feel like waking up gasping for air, but for me, it felt like paperwork. Endless, quiet, vindicating paperwork. The police lights faded from my driveway around 3 a.m. that night, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy, but clean. The next morning, the real cleanup began. I didn't have to lift a finger. The state did it for me. The charges were filed before breakfast. 2 counts of attempted murder in the first degree, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and a laundry list of fraud charges related to the loans Mark had taken out in my name. The sheer volume of evidence, the video, the lab report, the texts, meant there was no bail. They went from my dining room table to a holding cell without passing go. The legal ruin was absolute. I hired a forensic accountant to untangle the mess Mark had made of their finances, and what he found was pathetic. They weren't just broke. They were underwater in a way that makes drowning look peaceful. Mark had leveraged everything: Elena's car, their apartment lease, even her jewelry, to pay off the vig on his gambling debts. When the news hit that they were in custody, the creditors descended like vultures. I watched from my living room window as a tow truck hooked up Mark's leased BMW, the one he loved more than his wife. There was something deeply satisfying about watching it bounce unceremoniously down the driveway, the alarm blaring a final, pathetic goodbye. Socially, the fallout was nuclear. And the neighborhood didn't just gossip, they judged. The story of the poisoned sister leaked to the local papers, and suddenly, the perfect couple was the town pariah. Cousin Sarah tried to call me a week later, sobbing about how hard it was for the family to see Elena in a jumpsuit. She talked about forgiveness and mental health. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply blocked her number. I realized that keeping the peace had almost killed me, and I was done being a casualty of someone else's comfort. The trial was brief. Mark tried to cut a deal, offering to testify that Elena was the mastermind if they knocked his sentence down to manslaughter. The prosecutor laughed at him. The video of him pouring the powder while checking his watch was played in open court. The jury didn't even need to deliberate for an hour. They came back with guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge, a stern woman who clearly had no patience for men who poison sick women, gave them 25 years each. I didn't go to the sentencing. I read about it in the paper while sitting in my garden, drinking a cup of herbal tea. And that brings me to today. The house is quiet now. The guest wing where they lived has been scrubbed clean. I hired a professional crew to remove every trace of them: the smell of Mark's cheap cologne, the stain of Elena's perfume, the bad energy that seemed to cling to the walls. I even replaced the carpets. It cost a fortune, but reclaiming my sanctuary was worth every penny. My health has returned with a vengeance. It turns out when you aren't ingesting 1,300 milligrams of caffeine a day, your heart is actually quite strong. My blood pressure is normal. The tremors are gone. The fog that I thought was impending death was just sleep deprivation and toxicity. I walk 3 miles every morning now. I manage my own portfolio. I fired the enablers from my life and hired strangers who answer to contracts, not bloodlines. I'm sitting on my patio right now. The sun is setting, casting long golden shadows across the lawn that Mark wanted to sell. The air is cool and smells of jasmine and impending rain. There is no one here to ask me if I've taken my meds. There is no one checking my pulse with greedy fingers. There is no one waiting for me to die. I pick up my tea. It's warm. It's safe. I take a sip, and for the first time in a year, I don't taste fear. I taste victory. The silence isn't lonely anymore. It's expensive. It's earned. And it is absolutely, undeniably mine.